North American Dogman Project. If you listen to the show, you'll remember Dave from past episodes he's come on and done. The original guest I had lined up for tonight's show wasn't able to do it at the last moment, so I contacted Dave, asked if he'd be willing to come on and fill in, and he agreed luckily, so here he is. Dave, thanks so much for coming back. I really do appreciate it.
It's always my pleasure, Vic.
Oh, it's always great having you. For those listeners who haven't heard you on past shows, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Well, I'm 55 years old, married, no children, retired, usually from the Philadelphia area, though I do spend my summers in Vermont. I used to work for IT, and I did some dog training after that. I've had some encounters with various crypto entities. I have a couple of episodes on Dogman Encounters Radio. I have episode 95, where I had an encounter with a dogman in the swamps of North Carolina. And then after that, I was offered a position with the North American Dogman Project and went on to do some researching. And I researched a encounter in the area of Schwenksville, Pennsylvania. And I've continued to do that.
For anyone who hasn't heard those two shows that Dave just mentioned, I highly recommend you check them out because they are both really good episodes. Dave, since you came on last and talked about that Schwenksville case you investigated, what have you been up to?
Well, since the ending of that particular episode, I left the Philadelphia area and decided to spend my summer in northeastern Vermont.
Since you've been in Vermont, you've been pretty active in the dogman field. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I hadn't intended on that, I'll tell you. I had intended on coming up in Vermont, in this area, and spending as much time relaxing as I possibly could. But it would appear that Dogman has followed me here, in a sense. My name and my contact information is out there. And when I got up here and I had settled in, I received a couple of phone calls from people who wanted to have investigations done in and around their properties.
How fast this is moving seems to be taking you by surprise. I can understand that feeling, but when you consider how good of a job you've done when you've been on the show, I guess you shouldn't be all that surprised. Speaking of that, you recently were surprised when more than one person who you didn't know approached you and said, "You're Dave Leidy, right?" Please tell us about that.
Yeah, I was out with several different people doing different activities, camping and some other researching. And sometimes when there was a dull moment and people were off by themselves, I had this one guy come up to me and he said, "Hey, you're Dave Leidy, aren't you?" And I thought, "Oh, what is this?" He went on to say that he had heard the podcast, he had heard the episodes from the show, and he wanted to know about it, as he said it had affected him greatly, and we had to talk about it. And then that was pretty interesting. And after that, I had another guy do exactly the same thing, and I was kind of ready for it this time. And he told me that he was affected by it, and that he also had an encounter, and he didn't know what to do with it. So listening to me and then meeting me gave him an opportunity to get involved in investigating it.
Having something like that happen to you once, where someone that you didn't know approached you and said that to you, that'd be one thing. But the second time around that it happened, it really had to blow you away.
Yeah, that's true. The third time was pretty interesting too.
Yeah, that's probably going to be pretty hard to get used to, but I can understand it. Since the first show we did together, how many eyewitnesses have contacted you?
Well, there was the couple from Schwenksville, and then there's a gentleman that lives in the eastern Pennsylvania area that I have spoken to twice, but I haven't been able to visit him as yet. And since I've been in Vermont, I've had two people up here contact me and want to have their situation investigated.
From what I understand, of the two cases in Vermont, one you have yet to investigate, the other one you already have. What can you tell us about the case you have investigated?
Well, like I said, I had come up to Vermont thinking I was going to relax. My wife and I and our dog Kaiser up to our place in northeast Vermont. It's a nice log home on about 15 acres. I'll tell you, if you've never been to Vermont, you should go. Weather's perfect. People are perfect. Well, like I said, I thought I was going to come up and relax. The summers in Vermont, about 100 days, so a little tough to get used to, but definitely makes up for it. So, like I said, originally I had planned on just coming up and relaxing, but I did get a phone call when I was up here from the North American Dogman Project, and they had asked me to field calls if any had come my way. So, with that, I'm really happy to be working for them and helping people who might be having trouble with the whole thing. So anyway, I figured I could cover at least the whole northeast corner of Vermont, depending on where these calls came from. I didn't think I'd get any, but I was wrong. As it turned out, the one that I did check out was near the northeast Canadian border, somewhere near Averill. The other one was about an hour southeast, maybe near, if I had to put a town on it, I'd say Hardwick. So I drove to meet this guy. His name was Keno, and he lives a few miles from the Canadian border near what he said was the Continental Divide. I had no idea that there was such a thing as a Continental Divide in Vermont. Still not quite sure that there is, but that's what people call it up there. When you're up there, at one point, you stand on this ridge line between two lakes, and the river, or the water from the stream, runs in two different directions. One goes east into the one lake, and the other water runs west into the other lake, and they call it the Continental Divide. I don't know what that is. But this guy had a great log home on 53 acres of land. Everything on it was completely off the grid. He had water and wind and solar power. The other thing that really impressed me about his house was that he had an observatory. And he told me that on clear nights he could sit up in the observatory, and if the stars were right, he could see the colors of the northern lights, which I thought was pretty cool. He said he bought the place about 6 or 7 years ago, and he lives there by himself with his two dogs. Like me, he occasionally has friends come over and stay as long as they wish, and he also has a pretty nice on-off-road truck and ATVs and snow machines, and these are the kind of things you definitely need in that area. So we sat and we talked about all kinds of things, and we talked about his encounter. He told me that nothing really strange had ever happened until recently. He said he sits down at the house at night and drives around his ATV, and everything's pretty normal. And he said this one time he decided that he was going to go solo camping in a small trailer. And he said he camped about 15 miles from his house in some woods just over the New Hampshire border. After a couple of days, while he was camping there, he went out to collect some wood. He was out near an old quarry, and he thought he saw a dark figure walk into the tree line. And he said he got a pretty good look at it, and he got kind of frightened. He started to second guess himself. He said it looked like an upright walking wolf or a dog. And at this point he said something strange to me in French. He said that it was a loup-garou. I had never heard of that before, and I asked him to spell it. He said it was spelled Loup-Garou. It was a loup-garou. I'd heard of something called a rougarou, but I'd never heard of this one. And he went on to recount this whole French legend about the loup-garou. He said that the word loup is a French word that means wolf, and garou is an old Frankish word similar to werewolf. He said the legend says that when a person contacts a loup-garou and it draws blood, the loup-garou changes back to a human form, but the victim then becomes a loup-garou for 101 days. If that guy talks about it to anyone, he becomes a loup-garou forever, and if he doesn't, he'll turn back to a human. And I thought that was pretty interesting. Never heard anything like that before. Anyway, he said he didn't chase it. He decided he might be wrong. Maybe it was a bear. So he went back to his campsite. During the night, he heard snarling and a howl, and a bit later he heard some scratching on the trees, and he heard some things being moved around after he had gone back into his trailer. looking out his window, he said he didn't see anything obvious but some blurred movement. So the next morning, he got up, he went outside, he found that the blur was that all his camp furniture had been thrown into the woods. The scratching that he heard was a lot like the way bears scratch trees, except the scratching was through the bark and deep into the tree. And he said that he always thought that the bears would remove the bark from the tree. So he thought that was really strange. He also found some damage to his truck. So he decided that he would cut his trip short and go home that day. So he took the long route through some of the back dirt roads of Vermont and thought about what was going on as he was driving back there and got on home. Those back roads of Vermont are pretty interesting. They go past old and new hunting camps. They follow the power lines. Some of them even come out at old radar bases. So you can get seriously lost back there. There's no markings or anything. So it's pretty cool place to go. I personally spent a lot of time on those roads. It's really a great way to spend the day. You never really see anybody else, and you forever lose and find yourself all day long. Just ride around getting lost all the time. It's good to have a truck, though, I'll tell you that. Besides being lazy, watching moose, and going out to rural gun ranges, fishing, paddling around, I love to explore Vermont. It really justifies all the money I spend on my truck. After a while, it might even prove their worth to my wife. So exploring, it really lets you know how vast and remote and how unknown the whole area is. I've seen a lot of animals out there. I've seen all kinds of stuff. This one time I was up by Canada on a power line road, and within 20 minutes I saw a mountain lion, a bear, and a bobcat. So this stuff is out there. If you're slow and if you're quiet, it'll show itself to you. But it also lets you know how remote you are. But it's rare. You know, moose, deer, bear, you see most of that. Fisher cats, they're around, but you don't see them much. You just hear them. Middle of the night, it sounds like something's axe murdered in the trees. So, anyway, Kino says he took these roads home during the day, and he admitted that his imagination had him seeing dark figures in every tree line. And what he said is he never felt that way before. He had lived in the area for 7 years, and never before had he felt the slightest trepidation about being there. So, after about a week at home, he had almost forgotten about it. A neighbor asked him soon if he had seen anything weird. So before he could answer, the neighbor told him about all this snarling and howling and a few fresh deer kills by the woods where this other guy was camping. So he drove to the guy's house about 5 miles away, and they went to the camp, and they saw the deer kills, and while they were standing there, they thought they heard a snarl coming from the woods. Kino told me, he said he'd been growled at before by various creatures. Skunks and fisher cats sometimes growl at you. He said, but this was different. He said to me that it sounded like steam escaping from a water vessel. They decided to get out of there and think about it. They considered calling the police or the game warden, but decided against that. They both were Squatch guys, and they thought it might have been a crypto. The neighbor said that he knew a guy that worked for a crypto group, and that's how I got involved. So, when I arrived, I talked to Kino and I assured him that the North American Dogman Project would take him seriously. We'd respect everything about the issue and try and help him. He wanted to know what it was and how to keep it from his area. None of us really ever heard of anything up here, except maybe Sasquatch. I know that decades ago there was some disappearances near Bennington, Vermont, but not much after that. So, at this point, I decided to check it out. I wrote up the initial report with Kino, and I decided that I was going to take a look in the area. It might be nothing. No one had really seen anything. I mean, not anything for sure. So, I went with him and the neighbor, and we checked out the deer kills at the camp, and couldn't really tell if anything other than a normal predator had done that. I mean, there weren't any tracks. There wasn't anything that would have said anything different. So, I was going to go out, and I decided to bring my friend Ernest with me. We talked about it, and we said we were going to go and do some camping in the area and see what we'd see. So, we brought our supplies, camping gear, fishing gear. He brought his bass boat, And it's a good chance we'd maybe get some fish, maybe some trout or perch, walleye, landlocked salmon. There's all kinds of stuff around there. So we did that, and of course we also brought some weapons. I had since upgraded my 357 to a 44, and Ernest had a Desert Eagle 50 caliber, and I thought, oh, that's good. He also was bringing a lever action 30-30. So we went to the range day beforehand, and decided to hone our skills a little bit. So the other thing we need to do is to approach this in a methodical manner. First, I wanted to make sure what we were dealing with. I always go into these encounters with the idea that the issue is completely unexplainable, then go from there. Ernest was telling me about coy dogs. So apparently in Vermont, coyotes have bred with local wild dogs, and the result is a larger, rather fearless coyote with no fear of humans. And that's pretty scary, but not the dogman. So we decided to drive the back roads. The first place we were going to stop was a Vermont state park that we knew, and try that first. The first day and night, we didn't encounter anything. We didn't have any fish either, but we camped, a nice fire, nice food, slept peacefully through the night. The only noise was the other campers around us. So next morning we broke camp and moved on and camped in the backwoods that I had described before. Deep, dark, and wild in those roads back there. But still nothing. The only thing that we really encountered was there was 4 guys went by on horses who said they were camping nearby. Woods were quiet. Still, mist clinging to low areas. Just normal Vermont environments. The only thing we heard was a couple of night birds, great horned owl, insects, small mammals, stuff you'd expect to hear. So again, we just had a cooking fire, let it go out. Good night's sleep. Third night, we camped in a cornfield just over the New Hampshire border. And I got to tell you, that was the weirdest camping of my entire life. I had camped all over the place in all kinds of different areas, and I will never camp in another cornfield. I got to tell you that. It was just odd. You're in the middle of the cornfield and nothing around you but corn stalks. And the noise comes from all different areas. The surprised creatures run in and out of the area that you are, and the light filters down in odd ways. You would never think that a cornfield would be that odd, but I got to tell you, never again. So just before we were bedding down for the night for that, well, that's another thing. Are we bedding down for the night, or are we sleeping on corn stalks? Well, either way. We were just about to drop off to sleep, and we heard one very long, distant howl. That was weird. But, again, we dropped off to sleep. So we thought maybe it could have been a coy dog after he was just talking about that and what our conversation was on earlier. But, again, we dropped off to sleep. The next day, we broke camp as much as it was, and we traveled off maybe like northeast of the campground we were at, the cornfield we were at. And we were just meandering through the back roads of New Hampshire now. So we found our way to the edge of a decent-sized lake. Ernest called this place the Gore, and I thought that was interesting. And I asked him what that meant. He said that a gore is a place that exists because of a mistake made by a colonial surveyor. He said originally the land was owned by no one, but technically the state had taken control of it, but still was basically uninhabited. There was something else out here. The place was pretty remote, but it showed signs of recent logging activity. A lot of times a landowner will sell an acre or two of hardwood deep in the woods, clear it, and then replant it. That way the clear cut isn't really noticeable, except from the air. Then after about 20 years or so, it's well on its way to growing back. So I'd say that most of the timber on the East Coast was cut down from wherever it was, virgin forest, over the last 200 years. To say that there's very few old-growth stands anywhere on the East Coast is probably saying something. I know there's pockets. I know there's a great pocket of hemlocks in Pennsylvania, Cook Forest, and there's some other areas that have been reserved, but not many. So this place was old. It looked though it hadn't been cut in about 100 years, and that's pretty rare. I mean, usually every 40 or 50 years is more like it. It'll stand, but maybe it's because it was a gore. Who knows? Some places in this gore were really thick, and it looked like they hadn't been touched at all. But there was also some recent activity. It looked as though like about an acre was cut, and then they started on the second acre and then just stopped. There were cut trees laying there, and a couple of them had some branches lopped off, but even weirder, some of the tools were left on the ground. Ernest and I looked at each other and thought, uh-oh. I mean, I'd seen that once in a haunted house where the workers had just dropped their stuff and ran when something spooked them. And this felt just like that. It was a really creepy feeling that we hadn't really noticed before. Kind of a semi-watched feeling. So we were up all night because we'd already been spooked, and we had a nice bonfire going, and there was a lot of old cut seasoned wood lying around, so we sat up talking. And a little later in the night, we heard a barred owl in the distance, and he was answered by a much closer one, and we were listening to them for a while. Then the wind picked up, and I'll tell you, the wind picked up and the fire shadows looked really weird. The shadows were dancing around and kind of freaking us out. They looked really bizarre. And then, after a while, the wind died down, and just then the owl sounded off loud and really close. Warning hoots scared the crap out of us. He did it about 8 or 9 times, and then he stopped. So, slowly the regular noises came back, and we started to relax. And after about 20 minutes, all the noise stopped. Silence. We looked at each other. Hair stood up on the back of my neck. We heard a snarl. So, I snapped my holster. And we started to hear crunching noises, sticks snapping, breathing sounds. I mouthed to Ernest, "Bear?" And he shook his head. And I nodded, and he still shook his head. And I was hoping bear, but I kind of knew they were all vegetarians around here. Not that they wouldn't pass up meat, but that wasn't very usual for them. So I shrugged. And what else? Humans? Maybe. Then no noise again. Complete silence. Felt like we were being watched. Definitely watched. Intently. It lasted for over an hour. Then the forest noise would start up again. And then it would stop again. And it was weird. It went on like this all night long. There was no way we were sleeping this night. So this thing went on and off, like I said, all night long. So we kept the fire going strong, and we just kept looking around. We'd hear low snarls. Once in a while, we'd hear a sound like metal being smacked, but couldn't really see anything. So just about dawn, all the forest noise came back up like a switch was thrown. And everything seemed normal. By this time, we were totally wired. So we decided to fish instead of sleep. I mean, we were wired up. We were wound. We were freaked. We were delirious. Take your pick. But we launched the bass boat, and we went out maybe 100 yards from shore. So we were out there about 2 hours. No bites. It was maybe 9 o'clock in the morning by this time. I was just starting to think that something was nibbling my bait, and I got Ernest's attention. I saw a dark shape over by the truck in our campsite. And we both got a real good look at it. I'd say we were about 40 yards out, drifting in. At first, we thought it was a dog, and then we thought it was a bear. It disappeared, and just as we started to think it disappeared, it showed itself again. It came right out toward the shoreline, kind of half hidden by the bushes. It looked like it didn't see us. It was bent over, and then it just kind of stood up. There was no popping sound at all. It just stood up. Maybe it was already up. It moved a big, large tree branch out of its way like it was nothing. And then it looked right at us. It was like a knife to my stomach. There was intelligence in that look. It was about 8 feet tall, maybe 3 feet wide at the shoulder. It had a German Shepherd type head, a very pointed kind of fuzzy ears on top of its head, and a long muzzle. It had muscular arms and legs and kind of a thin body. It was black, kind of furry. And the fur was thick around its head and shoulders, but thin around its stomach. I really couldn't see its backside, but I could see a tail hanging behind it, kind of between his legs. We couldn't really tell eye color, and they weren't really glowing, but it was pretty bright daylight, so maybe we just couldn't tell. Couldn't see his feet, but his paws were more like hands with long claws on each finger. I just really was kind of in a state of shock. It was broad daylight, and we were seeing this thing. And another weird thing is it seemed to have like darkness around it. It wasn't like a cloud or anything. It just looked kind of fuzzy. And maybe because of how dark its fur was. The other weird thing is it seemed to have a patch of red on its right shoulder. I mean, we were still about 40 yards out, but you could see it. It looked like a bright red spot on his shoulder, and it didn't look like fur. It sort of looked like a piece of cloth about 4 inches in diameter, maybe rectangle shaped. I couldn't see it very well, but it was definitely red. So it stood there for about 2 more minutes by a tree. We were looking at it, and it's looking at us. It showed its fangs, made a growling, kind of a gurgling noise, looked both ways, shook a little bit like a dog does, and then just took off running. We thought about staying right there in the boat for the rest of the day. But after a few minutes, we came in. And we brought the boat in and we looked around. And we didn't see anything. We went down to where he was standing by the lake, and we saw one track, and it had to be his. It was pretty fresh. They looked like wolf tracks, but kind of bigger. The ground was rocky and dry except by the water, so we found one good one. So we looked back up in the woods where we thought it went, but there was nothing there. And we went down the path a ways, but nothing there either. And we decided against tracking. Maybe if we had more people, we could have. Maybe not. At this point, we decided to pack it up and go. That's when we noticed there was damage to the truck. It was really kind of weird. There was these matching crunch marks, like someone had pinched the back of the bed rails together. And there was a big dent, like someone had kicked the body in right above the tailpipe. Well, we took pictures of everything, and we took some notes, and decided to pack it in and head home. Had a lot to think about, a lot to write up.
That is a lot to write up. From what I understand, you took a lot of photos through all this experience, and consequently, we'll be posting those on the YouTube version of the show.
Yes, I took a ton of pictures. I don't even know whether I can fit all the pictures I took in, so I'm going to do my best and try and just put up the pertinent ones.
That sounds good. Yeah, send the ones you can, and we'll definitely get those posted for you.
I mean, thing about research and thing about photographs is we don't always, as researchers, post all of our research on the internet. Some things we just don't put on for all of the public to take a look at. Some of it's in the file, but there's definitely some things that people should see.
Well, I'm sure there are a lot of people out there listening that are looking forward to seeing those photos, so thanks again for sharing those. With regards to that dogman you saw on the bank that day, how did it compare in appearance to the ones you saw in North Carolina in the swamp?
Well, I got to say that they were similar in that the shape of the head. When I was in North Carolina, it was dark, of course. It was about 1 or 2 in the morning, but the head was the same. It was still a German Shepherd type head. Ears on the top of the head, pointed ears. Same thing with this guy, but this guy in Vermont, or well, New Hampshire, I'd say, he kind of looked bigger. He looked taller, he looked wider, he looked darker. Something about this one just seemed a bit, if it was possible, to be more menacing.
Considering the fact that the ones in the swamp in North Carolina were seemingly trying to surround you, what was it about what this one did here in Vermont that makes you think it might have been more menacing in its actions?
Well, it was by itself, that I know of. I'm not sure whether I could say that its actions would be what I would say was more menacing. I'd say its behavior. The ones in North Carolina seem to be exhibiting some kind of a pack behavior, the same way a wild dogs might. But the one that we saw in Vermont seemed to be focused more in a strange way.
That makes sense. You talked about how when you went back to look for footprints and you found the one that you took a close look at, you told me in the pre-interview that that print had a strange quality that really perplexed you. What quality was that?
Well, we went back to look for tracks, and like I said, the ground was pretty rocky, but down by the lake it was pretty muddy. So there was a couple of tracks out there. We could see small mammals, maybe muskrat or raccoon, things like that, down by another section. But where this guy was standing, there was one pretty clear print. And what I thought was strange was that you could see the pad mark of where the foot was, but the main pad, but the finger pads seemed to be more splayed out than I would imagine that a canine type print would look like. All canine prints I had seen in the past, wolf prints, coyote prints, anything like that, the pads, the finger pads were usually pretty close together. But this one, they were pretty spread apart, almost like a mountain lion print. But it definitely wasn't, because it had the correct single pad and claw marks.
You mentioning the fact that those toes were splayed like that, it might seem strange, but it's actually what I would expect. I think that's a compensation device to help them balance better on feet that are more designed for quadrupedal locomotion.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. If you think about a dog or a wolf or any creature that usually walks on four legs, it distributes its weight completely differently than when it would be on two legs. Maybe that does make a lot of sense.
I think that has a lot to do with it. As that dogman was standing there on the bank looking at you, did you notice it making any strange movements?
No, I don't think so. Like I said, in my previous encounters, I had seen a strange movement when they actually stood up. In my first encounter, when he stood up, it didn't seem natural for him to stand up. His legs popped into place, and it seemed to really have to think about standing up. That's why I thought that this particular one may have already been up and was just crouching over a little bit. So when he stood up, it didn't seem to be out of place. And while he was standing there, he was looking around, but it didn't seem to be unnatural in his way. He seemed to be pretty comfortable standing there.
Well, that's interesting. As you're watching this thing move around your campsite, did it seem to be moving with a purpose, or did it just seem to be there with no particular goal in mind?
Well, it was kind of hard to tell. I don't know how long it had been there before I noticed it. We were out on the lake, and I looked in, I saw the shadow, and I got Ernest's attention when we looked at it. So I'm not sure how long he had been there. And I say he, I really don't know, but I don't know how long he had been there before we noticed him. But he seemed to be checking the campsite. He wasn't standing in one place and looking around. He seemed to be walking around the campsite, bending over and looking around.
I hope he wasn't looking for you.
I'm not sure about that. I mean, when he came out onto the bank, he didn't seem to see us at first, so I want to think that if he was looking for me, he would have come out and maybe spotted us right away. But like you said, he definitely seemed to be looking for something. But from what it was, it seemed to be something closer to the ground.
I guess you can't think for them. You never know what's going to motivate them to do one thing or the other, so we're just going to have to wonder on that. Something I'm also wondering about, though, is this dark aura you talked about seeing around this thing. You mentioned that it might have been a quality of its fur, making it just appear that way, but if you had to say, do you think it was more than likely some form of an aura around this creature, or do you think it was more than likely the quality in its fur making it appear that way?
Well, I can't say for certain, and I know it doesn't make a lot of sense, but at first it seemed to just be a dark fuzzy fur, that was surrounding it. But the more I looked at it, the more it seemed like it was actually a little dark around the outline of its body rather than just the darkness of its fur.
That had to be so creepy to see.
It was really, really weird. I really didn't know how to explain that. I had said that the first time I had seen Dogman in the swamps of North Carolina, it had yellow glowing eyes. This guy's eyes weren't glowing at all, and I really couldn't tell what color they were. They didn't seem to stand out. But if something was to stand out, it was the fact that there seemed to be an outline around this guy.
That had to be so hard to get over. To this day, is Kino still convinced it was a loup-garou, or what's his take on it now?
Well, after we left and we broke camp and we went back and talked to Kino, I did not say to him that we had positively encountered a dogman. I told him that we had a possible encounter. From what I told him, he seemed convinced, or at least partially convinced, that what we had possibly seen was the loup-garou in his mind, in his description. And what I told him was, whether it was or not, he should continue with his normal activities and just be as careful as he always was, and maybe a little bit more, just thinking that there may be other creatures in that section of Vermont anyway, and he'd need to be more careful.
I'm sure in a way when Kino called you in, he was hoping you would turn up some evidence, but when you came back that day and reported actually having your own encounter, I wonder if that kind of disappointed him in a way, just for the fact that it reinforced his idea that he had some problems there.
It's hard to say. He didn't really give me a lot of feedback in the way of body language, and he didn't have a lot to say. I think that he wanted more of an explanation than the one I gave him. And I don't know whether I would call it disappointment, but I think he wanted more information.
Well, that makes sense. The more you know about something, the more comfortable you normally are with it. When you're talking about something like dogmen or loup-garous or whatever that was out there on the bank that day, since there are so many things about them that we just don't know, I can understand his hunger for information about these things.
Yeah, I told him that it was a possibility, and I told him that he should just go about his business the way he normally would just to be a little bit more careful and possibly armed. If you live in that section of Vermont, there are a lot more larger predators than in the rest of the state, and if you're going to go out and wander around the back roads and in the country, it just makes sense to do that.
Oh, it does make good sense. Did Ernest ever tell you about noticing anything that day while you're looking at it on the bank that you yourself hadn't noticed?
Ernest and I compared a lot of notes after the encounter, and I was kind of happy to talk to him because I had been with other researchers that didn't want to talk about it at all. We went back and forth about what he had seen and what I had seen, and I would say that most, if not all, of what we had seen matched each other's descriptions.
Well, it was daylight, and both of you were so close to it that only makes sense, so I guess I'm not all that surprised. My last question for you, Dave, before we get out of here is, you more so than most people are familiar with the fact that most people in the Sasquatch field, as far as investigators would go, it seems like most of them kind of shun the idea of dogmen being a reality. What would you tell someone who doesn't believe your story about what you experienced that day or about the encounter you had in the swamp in North Carolina?
I understand somewhat where the Sasquatch guys are coming from, being partially that way myself. I don't think it's a really good thing in anything you do to follow one thing in one direction. I have met a lot of guys involved in Sasquatch that told me that it wasn't so much that they didn't want to believe in Dogman. It was more that they were more interested in Sasquatch and they had devoted themselves to that, and that's what they were concentrating on. I understood that, and I respect that. But at the same time, I would tell them that they need to just keep themselves open to other aspects.
I can't thank you enough for doing what you do, and I can't thank you enough for coming on the show tonight with so little notice. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Vic. Anytime.
Thanks again so much, and have a great night.
Thanks, you too.
Thanks.
Good night.
Bye. Hi everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff and I'll be your host for the show. If you've had an encounter of your own and would like to speak with me whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. For tonight's show we have a special guest from the UK, Colin Keelty. Colin, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Vic. It's an honour to be here.
Oh, it's great having you. Please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Well, Vic, I grew up in a small fishing village. Well, it's a small town actually called Widensea. It's approximately about 18 miles from Hull, maybe same again from Bridlington on the east coast. When I grew up, it was you don't have computer games when I was a kid. I mean, I'm 50 years old now. We was always outside, we was always in the fields or woods or playing everywhere we could, really. My father was a handyman. He did trade, and he was also a game man. He used to go shooting, so he used to take me with him. And, I'm no stranger to the outdoors. When I sort of like left school and everything, I used to be reasonably fit. I used to do a lot of running, and that was in the countryside. I got into backpacking. I got into woodmancraft and all sorts. So the outdoors is no stranger to me. Well, I thought I'd seen everything until like a few years back, and things started to unfold. But that was it. It's just a normal seaside town. Everybody seemed to know everybody. It was in the 80s, basically, I grew up, and it was absolutely fantastic time, to be honest. But that's me. And now I live in a little village just outside Hornsea. I work full-time, amateur photographer now, so that's basically my life. Quickly passed through it there, Vic.
Well, you definitely sound like a well-rounded guy to me. Colin, you got into Sasquatch when you were 14. Please tell us about that.
Yeah, I saw a program. I think it was on the BBC. We only had 3 channels in then. I think it was about 19. I can't remember the exact date, but it was 1979, 1980, somewhere on there. And I saw it on the BBC, and as soon as it come on, I just was memorised by it. To be honest, it was going through different encounters from Canada, Alaska. There was all over the US. And I was just absolutely glued with it, and it just would not leave my head after the program. We didn't have the internet then. A magazine came out called The Unexplained. So I started buying, I think it was once every fortnight if I remember correct. So I collected all them, and the more I read about it, the more I was just intrigued about it. The biggest ambition was to come to America and do some of my own investigations, but family and job and everything always gets in the way, I suppose. But yeah, when the internet come along, it just opened up a total big can of worms. It was unbelievable. The amount of stuff out there and the amount of sightings that people have seen is absolutely unbelievable. But yeah, I really, I believe in it, Vic.
Once you found out about the Sasquatch phenomenon, it was like a whole new world opened up for you.
Yes, it was. Yeah, it certainly was. I mean, nowadays, I mean, some of you good listeners, I'm sure they use YouTube, but I use it a lot. Some of the sightings, some of the guys out there that's actually investigating are absolutely brilliant. They're doing a really good job. Some of the video evidence, obviously, is a bit hit and miss, but some of it's really spot on.
You started researching U.S. dogman cases about 3 to 4 years ago. You didn't get into UK dogman cases until about 2 years ago, though. Why the delay?
Well, to be honest, even though I've seen 1 or 2 on the YouTube over the years, I didn't really sort of like make any connection, or I believed in it, but not totally, not 100%. And eventually I started getting to see a few things on YouTube about the dogman in UK, and I thought, well, to be honest, I didn't believe that at first, especially in the UK. I thought, well, I can't see how a dogman can survive in the UK. Until I started looking into it, and a bit of my background with walking and backpacking, and I thought, well, I suppose it is possible. And the more I've looked into it, the more I'm 100% that there's something out there. What it is, I'm not sure. I'm no expert, obviously, Vic, but the evidence is just overwhelming. It's absolutely the witnesses. I mean, to be honest, I mean, you know, I talked to Paul St. Clair, which obviously from your episode, I think it was 62 and 64. Yeah, I mean, you can correct me there, Vic. But I mean, Paul, some of the people that he's interviewed are real top-notch people. There's like barristers, etc., and people in the community that are really high up. Some that I've spoke to is absolutely. There's one that's involved with the police now. I'm sure if that's the last people that are going to start lying, but there's no point in lying, to be honest. They aren't gaining anything out of it. So, but the evidence is out there.
When you tell people you investigate dogmen, what kind of responses do you get?
Well, it's a mixed response, Vic, to be honest. Some are actually intrigued and wanted to know why and how and what goes on and how many have I seen them, and you get all sorts. And some, I'll give you an example. I've got some details of 3 guys. There was on the Beck, there's some boats on the Beck. People actually live in these houseboats, and I got told which one to go to. And I ended up talking to this guy, and then the 2 guys come across, and I was just telling him what I'm up to and what I'm looking into. And I didn't actually mention a dog, man. We started chatting, having a bit of a laugh, and so I said, do you know anything about the dog, man? With that, you just could have cut the air with a knife. They just didn't want to know. They just basically just trying to get rid of me. So I thanked them anyway, and I left. It was just strange, but I do get that a lot. Like, here's a nutter. See you, mate. But you can't blame them, really. I mean, when you grow up when you're a kid, it's, get to bed, it's the boogeyman will get you. And when you get older, don't be daft. There's no such thing. Like, there's no such vampires. There's no werewolves. There's no this. There's no that. It's society puts a blanket over you. Really, when you actually start seeing things that you can't explain, you start taking another type of view. And you think, well, I've been blind all these years, and now things are coming into sight. If you understand that, Vic.
I definitely do understand what you're talking about. Yeah, it is a shame that you get treated that way when you're talking about something that really does exist, but that's how it is. I guess all you can do is just deal with it.
Yes, that's it. That's all you have to do. It's there's a saying in Britain, you could have broad shoulders. You just got to be thick-skinned. I have been called a nut. I appreciate that, and I don't mind. They ain't been there. They ain't seen the things I've seen. So, everybody to their own.
That's a good way to look at it. In 1988, a man you know told you that a Sasquatch had put a dent in his van. Please tell us the story he shared with you about that.
Yeah, okay. I can't remember the gentleman's full name, and I don't know if I could give his name out anyway, but he worked for an electronics firm in Hull, in the city Hull. Part of his deliveries was right at the top of Scotland. I can't remember the exact locations, but he says there was all the odd cottage with working mill in it. They used to knit mohair jumpers, etc., and hats, and that's how they earned a living. And there was one place up there, he told me, that he had to go up. Sometimes he took electronic parts, sometimes a washer, and they would get distributed at the top of Scotland. And sometimes they would go out to some of the islands, like Isle of Mull or whatever. Anyway, he says they've been doing it for about 2 years or something, and he kept hearing, because he's obviously slept overnight up there. And he kept going to pubs for pub meals and a drink before he got his head down, get some sleep. And he kept hearing conversations in pubs between these landowners and farmers, etc., about this Sasquatch. So he thought, oh, what a load of rubbish. Absolute load of rubbish. Anyway, I think it was in the second year, he says, what happened, one night, he was trying to save some money. His boss was giving him cash for stopping out on a night, so instead of spending it on board and lodgings, he used to keep it in his pocket and sleep in his van. Anyway, one night he asked whether he had this meal at this pub, and he says, yeah, is it alright to stop outside in my van and sleep in the van? So they says no, they didn't want him on the property after hours. So he says, well, if you go up about 3-4 miles up the road, they says, there's a bit of a lay-by. He says, just get in there. He says, nobody will disturb you. So I thought he'll do that, and it was next to some trees. So he went up there, parked up Anyway, he says he was there for about 20 minutes. He just got settled down, took a sleeping bag with him, and just managed to start to set him down, and slowly starting to nod. He started hearing all these branches snapping. Then they got closer and closer, he says. And next minute, it just a real massive thud in the back of his van. He says it lifted it off the floor. He says absolutely pooed himself. He jumped out with his sleeping bag, straight in the seat, started the van up and wheel spinned out of there. He says he drove for about 10 miles or so, maybe 15 miles, I think it was. I can't remember the exact details now, Vic. And he got to a little petrol station. One pump, it was one of those outback type of petrol stations, and luckily there was somebody there. So he told them of his experience, and he says they didn't even flinch an eyelid. He says, oh, yeah, okay, then, yeah, well, another one here, yeah. So he says, can I sleep here for the night, and can I use your phone to ring my boss, etc., I'll pay you. And anyway, he did, his boss had said, can you get the police in? We'll have to investigate this, obviously for insurance purposes. Anyway, the police went back the next day, and the trees was actually bent like a V, he said. Like something had just pulled them apart at the top and just walked through them. And the back of his van, it was just like somebody had really clouted it with a fist. It was unbelievable. Obviously, I never saw any photos. They didn't have a camera then, and cameras really weren't that type of thing in the 80s. But he was absolutely... It had affected him. You could clearly see, and he says they do exist. He thinks they exist. He never saw it. So I started questioning him. I said, are you sure it wasn't an army tank? Because there's a lot of army manoeuvres up there. And he says, no, there was no tank tracks. But the way the trees was actually split in a V, he says, you tell me. He says, because I don't know. But these farmers that he ended up talking to, he says, got you as well, has it? So what it was, Vic, I don't know. But obviously this gentleman that I was talking to was quite clearly shaken up about it.
Oh, I'll bet he was shaken up over that. And I'm sure that also he didn't spend any more nights parked along the side of the road trying to get some sleep in a van. I'm sure he would check into any inn instead.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I'd be checking in. I know. Straight after that.
Yeah, I would be too. You struggled for 2 years to get over your first encounter. Please tell us about what you went through trying to get over that encounter.
Well, to be honest, I mean, I couldn't understand what I was seeing. I know what I was seeing, but I think my brain at the time just wouldn't accept it. Like I said, you was brainwashed. Well, I was brainwashed. And, I kept thinking, it must have been a trick of the light, I don't know. But about 2 weeks after, maybe 3 weeks after, I started thinking about it more, and it got worse and worse, and I started to have nightmares, really bad nightmares. I used to wake up sweating. I remember actually waking up one night and I screamed. In my dream, this thing come over this gate. I'll tell you a bit about the story later, Vic, but this thing that I saw come over the gate and got me and started attacking me, and that's when I woke up in my dream and started screaming, and it took me a very long time. I think maybe about 2 years. It went on slowly in the back of my mind. Yeah, maybe a bit less than that. Slowly it starts going at the back of your memory, and you start forgetting, and it just stays at the back of your memory until sort of like recently, it sort of come back to light. Well, I knew about it, but I've only just started talking about it again, Vic, to be honest.
It can take quite some time to get over an experience like that for obvious reasons.
I agree with you there, Vic. I mean, obviously I'll take all this to my grave. I'll never forget about it. I mean, it's, what was it, 15, 20 years or something, maybe longer. You'll never forget about it. Whatever you see out there, it never goes away. I don't care what anybody says. It's always in the back of your memory, and when you go out there again, you're always thinking of it. Am I going to see another one?
When you have an experience like that, yeah, it's only natural that it's going to affect you that way. It's unfortunate, but that's how it is. In October of 1990, you had your first dogmeat encounter. Please tell us about it.
Well, Vic, it's a real long story, but at the time I was living in Hull. I had to get from Hull to Hornsey, and it was about 7:30 in the evening. I didn't have my car. The reason was it just failed in MOT, even though I'm like an ex-mechanic. I was working for another firm. I just didn't have time to repair it, so I got another garage to do it for me, and I needed to get to Hornsey. So with walking, I thought, well, there's no bus services. Not that time of night anyway, out there. So I thought, well, I'll start walking. So anyway, I got so far out of Hull, and the ironic thing about this, Vic, to be honest, I'll tell you viewers, it was actually a full moon, and I was actually glad of it, because when you get outside of Hornsey and get away from all the street lights, it's actually pitch black, absolutely. But the full moon that night, it lit it up like day, like a clear day, really. I was really glad of it. Anyway, I got so far out of Hull, and the car pulled up. I says, where you going, mate? So I told him. He says, well, I'm only going so far. Can I give you a lift? I appreciated it. So anyway, he took me so far. Anyway, he dropped me off a place called Whitedale Garage, and which is about, I don't know, halfway maybe to Hornsey, which I was really glad of. And I think I come on the road, and they call it Hatfield Road from Whitedale, which leads to Hornsey. You come up to the next village, which is Great Hatfield, but before I come to the village, this is the road I was on, Great Hatfield Road. I'm not sure the number of the road, but anyway, about halfway down there, I was walking on the left side. Usually when you walk on a night, this is from my backpacking days, you face the traffic. Anyway, that night, I just stayed on the left, so the traffic was behind me. Even though there wasn't much traffic that night, the odd car passed, but that was about it. Anyway, about halfway down this road, on my right, there's a field, and it had a grown hedge, but there's bits missing out of the hedge. You could see it clear as day. Anyway, walking down there, I started hearing something on my right, so I looked, and I could see these two back feet. It looked like a cow's back feet at first. I thought, a cow in a field, like, never thought out of it. And it was following me down as I was walking, and I kept looking at these back legs, and I thought, well, where's the front legs? I couldn't work out where these front legs was. I thought, well, it's got to be a trick of the light, is this? Anyway, a bit further on, I think they kept worrying me, and I kept looking, and I thought, well, no, it's not a cow. I thought, is it a sheep? No, I thought, no. A deer? No. Deers are not like that. And I just couldn't work it out. And I thought, well, it was all black, and it was definitely walking on two legs. I just could not see the two front legs, and I thought, what the heck's wrong with me? Am I tired? Anyway, we got a bit further up, and this must have continued on for a good 5 minutes, maybe 6 minutes or so. Anyway, as I was walking up, nearly approaching Hatfield, Great Hatfield, there's a pub on the corner. I think they call it the Rye Garth Inn. I could see it in the distance. Anyway, just coming up with it being light with the moon, with the light, and I could see this gate all coming up. Anyway, just started to approach. I thought, well, I'll find out what it is in a minute. And I must have had about another 5 steps to go, maybe something like 6 steps, and I heard this car coming up behind me. Anyway, so I stopped, stood on the grass verge to let this car go by. And the car goes shooting by. Next minute, his brake lights come on. Next minute, I saw his race lights come on, and he come hurtling back, and the window goes down, and he goes, Cole? Flipping heck, hey, Rob. There's a friend of mine from Hornsey. He says, what you were doing out here? That's a long story. I need to get to Hornsey. Get in. So I jumped in, and as I did, I looked over to the gate, and something that was stood there. I didn't see its face clearly. I could not describe its face at all. I thought, what the? And then we started driving off. I said, Rob, stop, look at that. He goes, what? And he goes, what? I said, that. Anyway, he drove off. I said, do you see it? No. I said, there's a dog. I'm telling you now, it looks like a dog. Stood there. He says, stop being stupid, Carl. He says, I think you need some time off. I said, no, I'm telling you, Rob, there's a dog stood there. Carly says, you're being daft. No dog stands there. No dog stands on its hind legs. So I thought, yeah, he's right. He's got to be right. So that's it, I let it go. Anyway, when I got to answer, I kept going on about it. And he says, look, do you want me to bring you back? I said, no, don't be stupid. I says, forget it. I said, forget it. He says, you going to be alright? I said, yeah, fine. And that was it, really. That's all I saw. But like I say, after about 2, maybe 3 weeks, I started thinking of more and more of it, and it started to worry me, and I thought, what was it? Could it have attacked me? And more answers. The more you think about anything, Vic, the more questions and answers, that you want to know. And it's just going on and on. I mean, like me investigating all these dogman sightings, it's like looking at a tree. You go up the trunk and you think you've got one question. Next minute you come to a branch and it splits off maybe 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. Oh, next minute you've got about 20 questions to ask and you just don't know where to turn. And you're looking for the answers all the time and they're not there. And I think that's very frustrating, but yeah, my first sighting, and that's basically what happened. I didn't get attacked. I just saw what I saw, and I can't explain what I saw. And I can't put them legs to any known animal I have ever seen. Now, like I say, as you know, I've backpacked, I'm into wildlife. I actually study wildlife, and I have never seen any legs that I can put them to. Apart from dog-ish legs. That's all I can say, Vic.
I can understand why you responded the way you did. That's not easy to deal with. How long did you wait after you told Rob what you had seen to tell anyone else?
I think it was the very next day. I worked with this guy, obviously. Again, I won't say his name. He was quite understanding, to be honest. I liked working with him. Anything you told him, he always sat there and listened. So I told him, and he says, well, yeah, I believe you, he said. And I said, oh, right. I didn't know if he was taking the mickey at the time, but I knew him that well that I knew he wanted. I just thought, well, he is a good listener and it's got off my chest. And I did. I've got to admit, anything that you say to anybody else, it does get off your chest. There's a lot of mental issues in this world for one reason or the other. So when you see something like this, actually talking to somebody does really help. These are 2 friends. And that was it, but it did affect me. I think you need to talk to somebody professionally if it does get on further, which I didn't. Going to a doctor and saying, excuse me, I've seen a werewolf, I think I need some help. Don't go down too well.
Yeah, that definitely doesn't seem to be the best course of action.
I think after them 2, maybe 3 weeks or whatever, I kept thinking about it. I did realise it was something that it's not supposed to be, well, maybe not what's supposed to be on this world. they maybe belong here same as us. You know, what right do we have to be here? Just like them, you know. It's they maybe be on the earth before us. But yeah, I just thought, well, is it dangerous? Wasn't it dangerous? You know, and that's what I think really affected me. I started thinking of maybe werewolf things, maybe subconsciously I started thinking of werewolf things, but I remember the nightmares quite well, to be honest, Vic, and some of them was quite disturbing. But like I say, over the years, you slowly get over it. Some people out there that do see sightings, I mean, on your show, I mean, you've talked to one or two, and they suffer quite well with it, you know, real bad, to be honest. And it is hard living with it, that you've seen it, because society says that these things aren't there, and you've seen something that you know is not supposed to be there, but you know it's real because you've seen it.
I'm not sure what's harder to get over, the actual experience itself or how most people treat you when you reach out to them. It really is unfortunate.
I think it's a bit of both, really, but I think the more it's the sighting, really. And like I said, I think it's the sighting because it's bred into you when you're a kid. That was stupid. There's no such things. And you just go through life like that. And then when you see something and you say, oh, that doesn't exist, but I'm seeing it. But I think if there was somebody out there, you could go to, this is why I'm starting to do this. And I think you're going to pick on it a bit later, but a guy saw one on the golf course. When he was actually speaking to me, after he spoke to me and told me his story, he says, thank you. So I said, what for? He says, well, it's built up inside for me for all these years. I've had nobody to talk to. And, you know, it's got it out of his system. I think he can, oh, wow, I'm all right now. I mean, like when you get rid of tension, you maybe have some problem at home and then you go see a psychiatrist, whatever. I've never seen one, but when you get it out of your system, you feel a lot better.
You are providing a really important service there. Yeah, it's easy to think that what I do is something special, but it really isn't. All you're doing is just listening to these people who unfortunately had these experiences with dogmen. If you don't do anything outside of that, except for just sit there and listen to them patiently, that right there will work wonders in a lot of cases towards helping these eyewitnesses feel better. So, yeah, I'm so glad, like I said, that that man found you and was able to unload on you and tell you about his experience. Could you tell roughly how big that creature was that you saw that night?
It's hard to measure it, but just going back to what you've just said, I think you are very important, Vic. Your shows, again, it's another release. It's like me talking to you now. It's releasing what I feel inside to you and to your listeners. So yeah, you are very important, Vic. So, but yeah, going back to the sighting, I'm not really sure. A rough estimate, I'd say it's maybe 6.5, 7 foot ish tall.
When it was back in the shadows looking at you after you had gotten into Rob's car, did it seem to be just focused on you, or was it possibly distracted by something else? What kind of impression did you get?
To be honest, I'm not sure. You could see sort of like the bottom half. I think it's the way the hedge was, well, the way the position of the moon and the hedge. I could see the bottom half, and all the top was in black in the shadows. So that's why I didn't get a real good look at its face. But it was definitely upright. I don't know if it was focused on me. Like I say, I couldn't see its head clearly at all. So that's why I wasn't sure what it was. I can't really say on that, Vic, to be honest.
Oh, that's all right. Did you suffer any unexpected problems as a direct result of that encounter?
Apart from the nightmares, not really, no. I think the nightmares turned pretty bad. My partner at the time, I mentioned it roughly to her, but I just kept it to myself. I shouldn't have done, really. I suppose it's my own fault. I maybe could have got it out of my system, but you don't know if people believe you, even if you've got a partner you live with. And they're always a good listener, partners anyway, but I just felt it belonged to me, and I had to just keep it there inside me. It's a strange feeling, Vic. I can't really explain it, to be honest.
That does make good sense. On the 27th of September of 2015, you had your second encounter. What happened?
Well, it's another one, a strange one again. I've talked to Paul Sinclair about this one, and the location it is, I can't give you the details. It is private land. It's owned by a big let's say, company. And I met the owner maybe about 4 months prior to the sighting, Vic. And I got permission to go on the land and go into his woods, etc. And I've been hitting this woods for about 3 months. With my photography, let me explain something. I've walked through them woods about half an hour before sunrise. And it hadn't bothered me, even though from my first encounter, I wasn't sure about that. But I've walked through there because the first light, or when soon as the sun rises and when you get that bit of light, it's the first 2 hours, it's like first 2 golden hours. A lot of wildlife seems to be dancing around at that time, in the morning. And even on the night when there's a sunset, an hour before, maybe 2 hours before, I usually get a lot of wildlife. So I always like to get there early, and I've walked through that woods I try to do every weekend. I couldn't do every weekend. I just did one, it was either Saturday or a Sunday, depending what day I had off from work. But I tried to get into the woods, and I usually get there early, maybe 5-4 in the morning. I'd walk through the woods with a torch, and you do things around you, bouncing around. You give it no thought, really. Until I got to the other end, I used to set my gear up, and that's it. I used to love it. But that day on the 27th, I actually got there late. I woke up, my alarm went off early, and I thought, well, I'm going to have a snooze. So I pressed snooze, and believe it or not, it never went back off for an hour and a half, and I couldn't believe it. Oh, now I'm going to be late. I'm going to miss all this, the wildlife. And so I was rushing about. Anyway, the time I actually got there, it was about 8:10, and I parked my car up. I was told to park my car down the lane. I was trundled off. It's about about half a mile walk down this narrow track. And you come to the woods. Anyway, as I was approaching the woods, I adopt me walk. An old guy taught me this a few years ago, funny enough. And how to try and walk silently. And so I've tried to adopt it a lot. So as I was approaching the woods, I was just watching where I stepped, and just really light footsteps. Anyway, there's these woods. They've put a new plantation in. I'm not sure what the trees they are, but these trees are about waist height. Not a lot of them. I'd say maybe 30, 40 of these new trees growing. And as I was walking down the track coming into the woods, it's on my right, all this new plantation. It's overgrown with grass, because obviously they can't cut the grass because of the trees that they're growing. And I'm slowly going up there, just looking around. Just imagine if I'm looking up the track that I'm walking up at the moment, and imagine a clock face, and I'm heading 12 o'clock. Anyway, something dead on 3 o'clock, something small, I'd say fox size, just got up and shot off, straight across. And I thought, to be honest, I thought it was a badger or a fox. I wasn't really sure. Within a second, say the 1 o'clock position, something large got up and just ran off towards the woods. I thought immediately it was deer, a mother and a foal, and I just ate the floor because I didn't want to disturb them anymore. With deer, sometimes with deer, when I've come across deer and photographing deer, sometimes you'll spook them and they'll just run off, and that's it, they've gone. They'll go for miles. Sometimes they'll go so far and they'll stop and they'll look round to see what's there, like what's chasing them or anything like that. So I was hoping that's what would happen with this. So there I am crouched under this long grass, like, I thought, well, I'll give it about 20 seconds or so. I slowly rose up. Couldn't see anything. Couldn't see any deer. So I thought to myself, I'm going to sneak through the long grass, because it'd be a perfect picture. If I could get this deer's head above this long grass, I thought it might make a really good picture. So anyway, I started walking through this long grass. I must have got in, I don't know, about 10, 12 feet or something. And I come across this biggest pile of poo that you can imagine. And it was a meaty poo. I mean, I used to keep dogs. My parents used to keep dogs. I mean, I've seen all sorts of poo with being in the wildlife, game type of thing. And I couldn't put it to anything. And it really scared me because of the amount that was there. And it was definitely a meaty type of poo. I'm no expert on poo, Vic. I don't know what it actually come from, but I could tell it was like a meaty. And I tried to judge how old it was. Like I say, again, I'm no expert. And I thought maybe from 24 hours at the most. It was still slightly moist, but starting to dry out a bit. Anyway, I looked to the left, and the grass had been flattened down in almost a perfect circle. It was about 3.5, 4 feet across, I think, a rough guess. So I thought, what the heck's been laid on that? I thought, what the heck? Then I thought, Cole, stop being stupid. I've had to go to toilet when out backpacking. When I have my backpack on, there's always a toilet roll in my backpack. So I thought, there's got to be a twitcher here, a bird watcher. We call them twitches in the UK. I don't know what you call them in the USA. I thought, I bet he's been sat here. He's got cut short. He's had to do it. That's it. We've all, well, a lot of us have been there. I've done it several times over the years. You just get cut short. So I thought, all right, that's it. Sorry. So I thought, well, I'll get back on track, get through these woods, and get to the other side where I wanted to be. Anyway, so I started walking. I come out with the long grass. And as soon as I come out of the long grass, I just got this burning sensation. I've been watched. So I was looking around, see if there's anybody around. I couldn't see anybody. I don't know, it's about maybe 200, maybe 300 yards roughly. And you went into the woods, but you go over like a little stream. There's like a little bridge. And as soon as I got to that bridge, the burning sensation was unbelievable. And every time I've been in that woods over the past 3 months, no matter what time of day it is, it's always activity in there, bird activity or whatever. You hear noise. As soon as I got to that, it was just deadly silent. It was just like I walked into a soundproof room. You couldn't hear anything. It was really weird. But the sensation of something watching me was absolutely overwhelming. And the air started to come on the back of my neck, and I started to get this smell. Paul asked me what the smell was. And I said, it was like a wet dog, but it was hard to describe the smell. It was, like I've been to public toilets, obviously. I'm a driver. That's what I do now. I drive a wagon. And some of the toilets you go in are absolutely disgusting. And that type of smell, not clean toilets. It was real. I thought, what is it like? And I kept looking in the dike that was crossing the little stream. Stinks. But I still, all the time, I was getting this burning sensation. I come across this little footbridge. And on my right again, this is where this large thing that actually ran. This is the area. And I come across the little footbridge, and on my right it's all bracken and brambles, and it's all overgrown. And I started walking down there, and I could hear footsteps behind this bracken. And I thought, what the heck is that? So I stopped, and it like a couple of footsteps, and it stopped. So I walked again, and then it started again. You could definitely hear it. It was snapping branches, and I stopped. It stopped. So I thought, well, there's got to be one of the wardens, one of the guys that looks after the land there. So I shouts over. I says, "Oh, it's Cole." I says, "Photographer, I have got permission to be on here." "Oh, was that like?" No answer. So I shouted again. Still no answer. That was strange. So I thought, well, let's go. And I started walking again, and then you could hear it. So I stopped again. It took like maybe 1 or 2 steps. Stopped. I thought, definitely something there, like. So I got on all fours to see if I could look under the bracken, and I could not see anything. It was that thick and overgrown. I mean, it was just unbelievable. You just couldn't see anything. So I got back up, and all the time there, my neck was standing up and my heart was beating. I just felt like I was in danger. Is the best way to put it. Anyway, so I thought, right, I'm going to get out here. I'm going to continue on to the other side of the woods, like, and I started walking. I heard it walking, but after about, I don't know, probably about 200 yards, this bracken come to an end. You could definitely hear it walking. Anyway, some bits was missing. They started to thin out this old bracken and all the brambles that was overgrown. And I just got an image of something black, and it was big black. I don't know what the heck it was, and I thought, right, my heart went in my mouth. I thought, oh no. And I was absolutely petrified, to be honest with you. I was trying to keep me cool. I was trying to not to show fear, even though I was shaking, literally shaking. I couldn't even hardly hold my camera. Anyway, I tried to keep me cool and that, and I started to walk on. All the time I had this burning sensation that these eyes was on me. Anyway, as I was walking up, I kept stopping and looking through my camera, through the viewfinder on my camera, pretending I was just trying to take pictures, but I was always kept looking at this spot. And I never found anything. But I think it goes for about a quarter of a mile to the other side of the woods, and there's a hard. Somebody's built this little hard, bird hard, and I've used it a couple of times before that. So I got in it, and you can actually lock the door. I shut the door, and there's a knot missing out one of the planks, and I just put my eye against this plank, and I must have sat there for about 6 minutes or more. I was just absolutely petrified, and I was waiting for this thing to come out of the woods. Anyway, after a bit, I didn't know what to do. I was panicking. I started to sweat, and I thought, oh, calm down, Cole, calm down. It's probably some guy out there, that's all. And I thought, oh, calm down. And I did. After, must be about 20 minutes, I started to calm down. I got my flask out, I had a cup of tea. And I thought, do I go home? What do I do? Anyway, I decided to stay there, and I set my camera up and everything, got the tripod out, and I just sat there, but I just couldn't focus on the wildlife. Like, this thing was running through my head all the time. And about 2 hours later, I heard the dog going, and my heart went in my mouth. Luckily, it was one of the wardens that look after the land. Anyway, I let him in, and he says, I thought it was you, Cole. I says, yeah, how are you doing, like, you know? He said, I thought it was your car at the top of the lane there. So I says, can I ask you a question? He says, oh yeah. He says, I says, you weren't in the woods earlier, was you? No, I've just turned up. Was one of your staff in the woods? No, don't work Sundays. So I said, oh, right, okay, all right then. And I left it at that, and I said, well, I'm packing up, I'm going home now. And I just packed up. And I walked past up that way, because you had to get back onto the track to get to my car. And it was just like a summer's day, the birds were singing. It was just like nothing ever happened. And what kicks me the most, to be honest, Vic, when I go home and that, and later in the afternoon, I was laid in the bath, and I thought, why not I take a picture? Why did I not take a picture on my mobile phone? I know my camera wouldn't have done it, because I use a 600mm lens, and I'd have to be quite a few yards back to actually take a picture of all this flattened grass and the pool. But it just did not occur to me at the time to take a picture, which that would have backed it up. But there was definitely something bipedal there, and I don't care what anybody says. There was two. There was a large and a small one, so I don't know if it was maybe a mother and a cub or whatever you call them. But it was just deadly silent, and the burning sensation, I've never ever felt anything like that in my life. And I've got to admit, it did scare the heck out of me. And that's what got me into doing my own investigations. After a few months, I thought, I'm going to look into this, because I started to have nightmares again. But now I've started to investigate, these nightmares have started they've gone, really, to be honest, Vic. But yeah, it was weird, even though, again, I didn't see it. There was definitely something behind this bush. And the way it was walking, well, like I said, there was something there, but what, Vic, I can't say.
Well, don't feel bad. An experience like that would give almost anyone nightmares. You mentioned that pile of poo. How large was it?
If I put my two fists together and then put another two fists on top, well, maybe one fist, two fists together, one on top, it was about that size poo, if you follow that.
Do you think that large creature had been dropping the kids off at the pool when you came walking past it?
Sorry, Vic, what was that?
Oh, that's just a phrase. Dropping the kids off at the pool is a phrase for taking a dump, having an excrement.
I have never ever heard that before, Vic. I don't know. There was, like I say, there was definitely something on my right that took off, something small. I'd say small dog size, maybe fox size. And like I say, within a second, something large. That's what I thought straight away, deer. That's why I hit the floor. I didn't want the deer to see me. I didn't want to spook them anymore. Obviously, I don't think it was deer, to be honest, Vic.
Yeah, sure doesn't sound like deer to me. When you heard the large creature get up and run off from your 1 o'clock, how close was it initially?
I'd say roughly, again, yeah, about 10, 12 feet into the long grass. I just saw a flash. Because I was looking forward at the time. Well, I looked at the one on the right, the small, and I thought, it was a rabbit or a fox. And I just flung my head back to the track, and with that, the flash, it definitely running through the grass. You could see all the grass parting, like it was on all fours. It wasn't upright. It was on all fours as it ran through.
Yeah, that is too close for comfort. Way too close. That encounter you had last year upset you more than your first encounter. Why is that?
I don't know. To be honest, I can't answer that question, Vic. I've never been back to them woods, I've got to admit. It and going out on a night and doing my photography early hours in the morning. I still haven't done that since then. I don't like things getting to me. I don't like things trying to scare me or rule me. It's like riding a bike. If you fall off a bike, you get back up, get up, back on your bike. Like I says, you have surfers in the US with shark-infested waters. You get attacked, they get patched up, and they're straight back on the surfboard. It has affected me, but I'm trying not to let it bother me as much, even though when I do go out, I'm thinking, what is around the next corner? And it is always in the back of your mind. But as going out on a night on my own or walking through them woods early hours in the morning, it's a tough one. I don't know if I'd do it. I would do it with somebody else if I had some company. On my own, I'm not 100% Vic.
Almost anyone will have trouble doing something like that after having those experiences. Do you think another encounter just might push you over the edge?
No, to be honest, I'm trying to have one. I keep looking for this alleged creature, beast, whatever you want to call it, a dog man. I keep looking for it. I want to gain some evidence. I'm just hoping, I do want to see it. The next one, no, I don't think it will put me over the edge, but I can't answer that until it actually happens, Vic.
Yeah, I guess that is one of those situations where you never really will know until you're faced with it. Do you have any idea why you had that second encounter when most people never even have one?
To be honest, I do, Vic. I seem to attract things. I don't know why. I have this ability. I have one for blowing my own trumpet anyway. But every time I go out, I seem to have a bit of I don't know if it's the right word, like a sixth sense. I can be walking, and next minute I'll just look to my right, real sharply, and there'll be a fox there or something, and it'll be in another field. And I just get this sense all the time, and weird things happen. I've had birds of prey fight in front of me. They just come, they could have chose any part of the field. And, I've had all sorts of weird stuff happening in front of me. And why, I don't know, Vic. I can't answer that. Maybe one day I might be able to answer it, but, it's one of them mysteries of life that you never, get the answer for that one, Vic.
Oh, I'm sure you're right. You've been speaking with the dogman eyewitness from a town named Halsham about her encounter. What happened to her?
Well, I haven't spoke to her directly. I've tried to contact the lady, and I've failed. But Paul Sinclair is actually onto this one. He's doing the investigation. He's actually spoke to the passenger that was in the car. Unfortunately, we don't know where we are with this one, to be honest, Vic. So I can't really answer that, to be honest.
Honesty, that's what we're looking for anyway, so no big deal. You recently spoke with a poacher you know who had 2 encounters of his own. What did he tell you about those experiences?
Yeah, this is a very interesting one. I really like this one. I've known this guy for quite a number of years. He is a bit of a Jack the Lad, but he's one of these rogues that you love. And he's one of the most nicest guys you could ever meet. He'd do anything for anybody. And if you had his last £5 note on him and he saw an homeless guy, he'd go give him it. He's that type of guy. He's absolutely fantastic, to be honest. Anyway, the other day, I was parked up in my wagon. I parked up to get a drink. And he come trundling over, and he says, I hear you into strange things. So I said, well, yeah, sort of. Why? So he says, well, I got told a while back, and he says, I've been thinking. He says, I've got a couple of stories for you. So I said, oh, go on then. So we had a cup of tea anyway. Usually I carry a dictaphone, but I never take it to work. So I like to record people's, I ask them if I can use it, and a lot of them say, yeah, that's no problem. Anyway, he was telling me that in the 80s, he's actually older than me. He's in his late 50s. I'm 50. And he was telling me, yeah, his first sort of like real job, it was a bit of a dead-end job. And not really much money, and he just got with a girlfriend and started living together, and trying to make ends meet was absolutely terrible. But he did like shooting. He had a high-powered rifle, which he wasn't supposed to have, to be honest. And so I used to go out and get 1 or 2 rabbits for the pot, really. And I don't grudge anybody doing that, even though I love wildlife. My dad used to do it. People who put meat on the table for family, that's it, that's good. I think that's brilliant. But if the people that kill animals just for sport is just absolutely beyond me. And, well, you don't want any language on the show of it. But anyway, and that's what he did. Then people started asking him, well, could you get me a rabbit? Could you get me a pheasant? And actually he says, it just started spanning from there. He says, and then Butchie's saying, can you get me this? And it was coming a good little earner. And, you know, he's managed to buy things for the family and all that. And this kept going on for like a couple of years. Anyway, he says it again, it was about sort of like 86 time. They weren't sure of the date. He says, I'd have to speak with his mate, the exact date, but he hadn't seen him for a few weeks. And he said the first experience, he says, he thinks it was around about sort of some midsummer time, it's coming maybe to the end. And they used to do poaching late at night, anywhere from about 12 till, well, he usually says they tried to knock off around about 3:30 in the morning. Anyway, this particular one was at Scarler, which Scarler is out of Hull, sort of like, and it's going towards a little village of Leven. It's in between. Scale is about 7 miles roughly at the top of my head out of Hull. And when you get into Scale, there's a lane on your right, on your left, and they call it Arnold Ings Lane, I think. And I think it comes to the end, and it's called Arnold Ings Drain, if I remember correct, Vic. Anyway, they says that they was using that at that time of, month. They was just doing that area, and there's a bit of woods, and it was 2:00 in the morning. They'd gone down these woods, and there was absolutely nothing about it, he says. He says, we've got a rabbit, and that was about it, really. And we'd been there for about an hour. And it was coming, so they decided to come out of the woods and call it a night. He says it was a really bad night. It was, pointless going out. There's no wildlife about. Anyway, they was coming to the edge of the woods where this field is. They had to walk across another field, obviously, to get to the car. Anyway, it was just coming to the edge of the woods, like I say, where this field is. And he heard a low growl. Then he heard like a howl. Anyway, it's quite a light night, he says. His mate looked at him and says, what is that? He says, so we'll call my poacher friend Bob. Anyway, Bob turned to his mate and says, I don't know, but I think we'll have to get thee out of here. Anyway, the shot off light. And anyway, so he was telling me all this. And I said, can you show me on a map? And he showed me. So I said, what was the growl like? So I said, it was a real, like, doggy growl at first. And it was this a weird howl, real howling noise. Anyway, on my mobile phone, I've tried to trace it out for you, Vic, but I can't find it. But on YouTube, again in America, I might have this wrong, listeners, but there was a guy on YouTube, and he thought he was having dogman encounters at the bottom of his land. And he kept hearing these howls on the night. So he got a recording device and recorded it. So I recorded it off that onto my mobile phone. So anyway, after we finished chatting, and he showed me all the exact locations that this happened, and he talked me all through it, where he went and where it exactly was. I says, look, I'm going to let you listen to something here, Bob. So I got my mobile phone out and played it. And as soon as I played it, his jaw just dropped. He says, where did you get that from? So I explained where I got it from. He says, that is almost exactly what I heard. He says, in that tone type of thing. So I said, wow. I said, that's interesting. So that was it. And he had a second one. He said about 2 to 3 weeks later, they moved up to a further wood, which is about a mile away. And that was heading towards the village of Leven. And they was in this woods, and he says that it's about 1:30 roughly, he says, and they could see this thing coming down the edge. And again, it was quite a late night. It went real pitch black. And they could see this thing moving. They weren't sure what it was. So his mate says, I think we'd better go on this edge. Anyway, they realised it was a dry dike. So they slid down this dike and stopped in the bottom of this dike. Anyway, this thing come up to roughly where there was, and he says it was shacking the trees and everything. And his mate says, what is it? What is it? He says, I think it's an horse. He says, you sure? He said, well, I think it is. Anyway, it just sort of like ran off. So he says, I think we'd better get out of here. And they did. So I said, was it us? He said, I don't know. He says, no, when the horses shack trees? I said, yeah, good point. So anyway, to this day, I don't know, but he says that's the only two things that he's ever come across that was really weird. But when I played that audio to him, he's just says, that's it. He says, that's what we heard. Anyway, he says he's going to get back to me, Vic. He ain't got back to me yet, but he's going to have a word with his mate who used to always go with him. They don't do it now. They both of them are in decent jobs, and, you know, this was the 80s. But he's going to try and get an exact date and, you know, what month it was. So I'm looking forward to that, just to record it into my books anyway, Vic.
Do you think the fact that he had those two encounters had anything to do with him stopping poaching?
No, I did ask that, to be honest, Vic. He says he did continue on for another couple of years. Then, like I say, he got a decent job and it just fizzled out, really. He cut the gun up because this high-powered rifle that they had, they weren't supposed to have. That's why I can't obviously name these gentlemen. So no, I don't think it did. He's the type of guy that he doesn't scare easily, really. Like I say, he's a bit of a Jack the Lad, and when he was younger, he was always in fights, so he doesn't scare. And I know he doesn't scare, but he's the most gentlest guy you could ever really come across, to be honest. Once you're a friend of him, you're a friend of life. So, like I said, I've only known him for a few years, but personally, I don't think that did scare him.
You mentioned twice that you know Paul Sinclair. How did you meet him?
Well, it started with my investigations. When I started doing investigations and I started getting websites up and reading into other people's stories, Paul's name kept cropping up. So, anyway, he says he was in the UK, so I thought, oh, this is interesting. So I did a bit of research on Paul, and I found he lived in Bridlington, which is only, from here, about 10 mile, I think, 12 mile. So I thought, well, that's handy. So I looked on Facebook, and there he was. And after that, you know, we've chatted a few times, and I class him as a good friend. He seems a really nice gentleman. He's very, very knowledgeable, and he's got such a passion, the same as mine, for investigating things. Even though Paul's main investigation is UFOs, he has got into the Dogman scene and also the Black Panther or Big Cat scene in Britain as well.
From what I understand, you plan to do some night investigations with Paul. You must be looking forward to that.
Oh, very much, yes. A little bit, yeah. I've got a 4x4, so I've put extra lights on it, to be honest, Vic. And I've got what they call, I don't know, hunters use them for spotting prey. I think they'll call it lamping, and it's a heck of a spotlight that plugs in your sig lighter. But does half light the field up. So, yeah, I'm hoping to go out with Paul. We have promised each other we are going to go and do some night investigations with each other out in the field. He already does it with, to be honest, I can't think of his name, Vic offhand now. He does go out with somebody on a night. But yeah, we're both looking forward to it, and yeah, I hope we do encounter something.
Paul is a good man. I can't think of a better man for you to go out there and look for these things with.
Yeah, I can't really. He's like I say, he's very knowledgeable, and yeah, I'm looking forward to it. When I think it'll be the next few weeks, hopefully. I did mention that the places that we wanted to go at the moment, it's holiday camps are everywhere around there, and it's school holidays here at the moment, so everybody's in all these camps. So when it quiets down a little bit, I think we're going to go out on a late investigation.
I hope you have good luck when you're out there. You spoke with another eyewitness who had an encounter at a golf course near a town called Hornsea. In fact, earlier in the interview, you mentioned this gentleman. What happened to him?
I got to know him through a friend, really. I mean, I don't know the guy. I've never met him until I interviewed him. A friend of mine mentioned it because he says he did mention it years ago. This is when it happened. So I said, is he willing to talk to me? And anyway, I got his mobile number and I contacted the gentleman. And we did meet up for a coffee, and he told me, well, he was having a lot of family issues at the time. His dad had passed away about a few months prior. Anyway, the road, I'm trying to get off the top of my head, what do you call that road? I think it's Hull Road, then it goes into the Great Hatfield Road. That's where I had my encounter on the Great Hatfield Road. Then you come up to, there's a big water tower on a hill, then it comes into Hull Road, then it goes into Hornsey. Anyway, when it starts for the Hull Road, as you're going into Hornsey, on your right there's a golf course. It's a massive golf course. I don't play golf, to be honest with myself, but they say it's a big golf course. And it seems to stretch for miles anyway. But just there where the water tower is, there's like a little car park. And he says, he used to go in there some nights to clear his head and just have a cigarette before he went home. Anyway, this night, he says, it just got dusk. It just like it was starting to fail. And he pulled in and he says he can't have been there more than like 2-3 minutes or whatever. And next minute, this thing just walked past. It's all fenced off, but he says it's one of these fences, lap fences that you can see through and everything. He says this thing just walked past the front of his car, and he says it was bipedal, it was upright. And so I says, well, can you give me a description? And he says, well, the best way I can describe that, he says, them breed of Irish wolfhounds. And I says, yeah. He said, it was one of them on legs. So I says, right. I never asked him what he meant by legs, but obviously he must have meant he was stood upright. But I should have asked him. I mean, I'm pretty new at the interviewing game, but when he says legs, does he mean like human legs, or does he just mean it was upright? But like I say, after the interview, when he told me all he says it did scare him. Well, he says, I wasn't sure if somebody was messing about. He says, I looked around. There was no one else around. And it just walked off down the golf course. So he thought it was somebody playing tricks. Is it somebody in a costume? And he says, again, it's maybe like me, he started to play on his mind, and it did start to worry him. When he got home, he told some of his family, he told some of his friends. That's why he wants to keep his name secret. And he says he got absolutely ridiculed for it. He says it must have gone on for weeks, and he says I was sick of people just taking the mickey, he says. And the next minute I turn along and he talks to me, and he says, to be honest, he says, thanks. He says, it's got out my system and it's got off my shoulder. He says, I feel like, I feel a lot better. And, I thanked him, and that was it, really. That's all I can tell about that one.
I never have heard of one that looked like an Irish wolfhound on two legs. That's awfully strange.
I've got to admit, Vic, I mean, all the videos and the blogs I've read and that, nobody's mentioned that. It's all like, well, I went, oh, okay then.
Yeah, that is pretty strange. Well, it's about time for us to get out of here, Carl. I really do appreciate you coming on, but before we do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
I can't think of any offhand. If anybody is interested in this, obviously, yourself, Vic, is the guy to contact, and you point them in the right direction. But obviously I followed you for a while, Vic, and I've heard a lot of people say on there, don't go looking for it. It's maybe good advice, because I know these things can attack, and if you believe in it or not, just stay at home at night, maybe keep safe. But the most important thing is, just don't have nightmares over it, really, and if you do, seek help.
Those are really good words of advice. Thanks again so much for coming on the show and sharing those experiences with us. I really do appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome, Vic. It's been an honour to be invited onto the show, to be honest. It really is a big event in my diary, to be honest, Vic, and I appreciate what you've done for me too, and it's been a pleasure.
Thanks again so much for coming on, Colin. I wish you nothing but the best. Have a great night.